going to be sharing with you today is passing and receiving the baton of leadership, something that I never had any intention of doing, okay? But that God miraculously orchestrated in my life. And just last month on January the 25th, I was installed as a senior pastor here of Center of Praise after about a 2.5-year transition period in training that really encompassed several different things. And hopefully what I'll have to share with you today will help you to see the importance of it and the value of it, whether you have an organization, a business, a church. Passing the baton of leadership can be something very crucial to the ultimate and ongoing success of the endeavor. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 2 says, "These things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." That verse really encompasses what it means to pass something on to others, who it says who are able to teach also. In other words, pass it to those who'll pass it to some, who'll continue to pass it to others, right? It's in essence what discipleship and disciple making is all about. And when it comes to passing the baton, we think of it on necessarily a higher level of leadership, the person who's an authority, the person who's the visionary, the person who is kind of that decision maker and all of that. But the question that really rose for me, why is passing and receiving the baton of leadership vital to the success of any organization? When it comes to that man or woman that's been given a vision by God, I don't know about what the experience has been like for you, but for me, God has always spoke to me things that were bigger than me. And when it comes to the baton of leadership, God-given dreams often outlive the receiver. I'll say that again. God-given dreams, God-given visions, often, very often, I won't presume that all the time, but very often outlive the one who receives it. In Scripture, Genesis 12, God speaks to Abraham something huge, right? And says, you know, your descendants will be more than the stars, more than the sand. And he's in essence, really at that time, he's an old man with no children, right? And God says to him, oh, you're going to have many children that you won't even be able to number all of them. Well, he saw Isaac, right? He held Isaac, you know, and it really didn't go much further than that in terms of what Abraham lived to see. Everything else was look at the stars and that'll, you know, give you some insight into what will be. Look at the sand and then that'll give you some insight into what will be. But the reality is that Abraham never stood before the children of Israel, except in his heart, except through the vision that God gave him. God gave him a dream that outlived the one who received it. I find that it's common throughout Scripture. Jesus talked in certain ways that let his disciples know that what he was training them for, as was just spoken, the kingdom that he was preparing them for and bringing into the earth would outlive them. When Jesus would talk to his disciples about going where they could not go, you know, and the kingdom coming and his return, in their minds, and I probably would have done the same thing, they processed it as though it was like next week, you know, when is the kingdom coming, Jesus? They would ask the question like he was saying, give me 30 days and I'll be back or something. And that wasn't the case. They had no idea that he was talking millennium, you know, but that was really the reality. Jesus was preparing them for something, called them to something. They had, in essence, a leg to run in a race that was longer than their lifetime. And so as I felt a call to ministry about 20 years ago, the specific calling was that to pastor. And so I had a lot of experiences from starting to usher in the church, to just serving anywhere I could serve, to working with youth and young adults, to having my own evangelism ministry, and 2 years in Mexico as a ministry. There are a lot of things that I did that were training for me and just great experiences. But deep down, I always felt I was to pastor. I was to lead a group of people in an urban setting. I'm from the city of Chicago, and there were times where I thought, hey, maybe I'm going to go back there and all that. So there was always this in my mind. It played out where somebody's going to anoint me and send me out, and I'm going to start. And I'd always heard pretty much the predominant story I had heard was that calling of God, and then that humble beginning with 10 or 12 people, and then God just blew it up, right? It just evolved into something over years. And so I thought, hey, sounds like a good story. I'm ready for it. Let's do it. And so I planted a church in Rancho Cordova, had about 30, 40 people, and it was tough. Okay, 30, 40 people was tough, you know. And it was through some transitions with that I met my predecessor, Bishop Parnell M. Lovelace Jr. I had been to this church a few times, had no intention of coming to this church. I just came with a family member to visit, and I was pastoring another church, and it was a nice visit, and it was great, and I never even met the pastor, but it was a nice experience. And then several months later, I walked into a city pastors fellowship with a few hundred pastors in our city, and we made eye contact, myself and Bishop Lovelace. We'd never met before, but that first connection was as though we'd known each other for years. And he said, well, come and sit with me and let's talk. And it just turned into something, you know, that has been life-changing for both he and I. He had the foresight to know that he needed a successor. He was coming up on 25 years of ministry, and it wasn't like that was some magic number, like 25 years is when, you know, but it was what God put in his heart, that it was time for him to transition. And through all this, I've learned some things, and it's amazing how this analogy of passing the baton has come out. And I've learned in looking at races, of the relay races, the baton is not meant to be held by the person that starts the race. They're supposed to pass it, right? And so in ministry terms and leadership terms, in terms of organizations and businesses, we can often look at that position as the baton. And shortly before the installation happened, many of you know Dr. Miles Monroe tragically, you know, died in a plane crash. And these videos came out of him speaking about transition and speaking about specifically passing the baton. And he said he had a dream of someone who went to a track runner who was in a coffin with a baton in his hand. And he was saying, you know, that's not the way it's supposed to look, that the runner is supposed to pass before they get to the grave, you know. And so I met a man through Bishop Lovelace who had a level of humility and foresight and wisdom that I'd never encountered before, and I was very honored that he chose me and that God put it on his heart for me to be the next person that he would pass to. So there's a couple things I just want to share with you about this, and that having that foresight and that humility to say, God, what you've called me to do may be bigger than my lifetime. And in order for me to play my part, I've got to also have a plan to pass this to someone else. And in my role from the receiving position, it's been very important for me to, number one, know my position, to know that there was a time, so for 2.5 years, I positioned myself. I had to say yes. I positioned myself to learn from him. One of the things he said was stay close. He said he'd pour into me everything that he had, everything that he'd learned over 35 really years of ministry. He said, if you're willing to stay close and be teachable, I'll give it all to you, right? And in a race, the runner doesn't give half the baton, you know. They give the whole thing to the one that's going in front of them. So I had to know my position. I had to respect the position of others. I had to stay in my lane. Also, I had to trust the training. He's had 25 years of experience with this. I had to submit myself to say, let me follow. Let me listen to what he's saying. He's done this a whole lot longer than me. I had to honor the past. This is a tremendous church, a tremendous heritage and history in our city. So I had to learn how to honor that and give God thanks for the foundation that I'm standing on. And lastly, start looking ahead. And when you watch a race, a relay race, the runner receives the baton. They take a quick look back. They receive it, and then they start looking for it. They get a good grip. They start looking for it, and then they hear the cheers of that one who passed off, yelling at them, saying, now go, you know. So that's what literally is happening with me. Bishop is still here. He's cheering me on. I'm honoring the past. I'm looking forward to the future. And God willing, one day I'll pass to someone else.